You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God's stealing bread drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing light.
Hello and welcome to Dark Loops, the Seers of Ardham, a podcast in which we, the Seers of Ardham, discuss HBO's fantastic new series, Lovecraft Country. I'm your host, Dr. Scott Jordan, aka Zombie Scotty, cognitive psychologist, philosopher from Illinois State University. And tonight we discussed episode 8, Jig-a-Bobo. Joining me in tonight's discussion are the other members of the Order. Brothers and sisters, please introduce yourselves and tell the audience a little something about yourself. And we will start with Vanessa.
Hello, everyone. I am Vanessa Hintz, licensed clinical psychologist here in the Milwaukee area, also a professor of psychology and an equity and inclusion consultant.
Fantastic. Byron.
Hi, I'm Dr. Byron B. Craig. I'm an assistant professor in the School of Communication at Illinois State University.
Very cool. Stanford.
Hi, I'm Stanford Carpenter, former archaeologist, sometime comic creator, and all-time cultural anthropologist coming to you out of Chicago.
Fantastic. Cianna.
Hi, my name is Cianna Greaves. I'm a public radio producer, a podcast producer. My work is based out of Baltimore, and I'm currently living in Chicago, and I'm really, really tired.
Totally understood. Leandra.
Hi, I'm Leandra Parris. I'm an assistant professor of school psychology at William & Mary in Virginia, and I do work around trauma-informed care in schools, social justice and equity in school psychology, and peer aggression.
Fantastic. So who wants to start talking about this episode? Favorite character, favorite line, favorite scene? Okay, I will. I'm going to just tell you guys my favorite scene. And there are no lines in this scene, but damn, they might as well be my favorite lines too. And that's Ruby's scene with William. I thought that lovemaking scene, the potion scene, the CGI was probably the most poetic, brilliant use of CGI I've ever seen. And, you know, what I love about poetry is it's open to multiple interpretations. And what I loved about that scene was this moment of conscious choice that she makes to take the potion. And then in the act of lovemaking, herself breaks through whatever spell she may have been under. And I interpreted that as a tension of the strength of being in terms of who you are, as opposed to these conscious choices we make to be in this space or that space. And the intensity of the sexuality coupled with the violence of the skin was just, I don't even call it horror. I just thought it was, I thought it was beautiful. And then we actually saw her body when it ended. I thought it was probably one of my favorite things I've seen on a TV show in a long time. So that's the opening big, guys, that scene.
I think also, Scott, it was, for me, I've just been on this kick about this intersection of the supernatural and I guess what we would call the natural. And for me, that was like this supernatural love-making scene to me.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the part that got me the most was at the moment of orgasm where Ruby/Hillary turns to the camera and you see both the blackness and the whiteness of that in that moment, right? And the eyes that are staring at the camera, and that I think that gaze that's on the audience, but that gaze that's also put back onto Ruby Hillary is absolutely striking to me. And it says so much about that entire episode, I think, that, and I'll talk about this later, of the blackness and whiteness of this entire episode, the kind of, thank you, dog, I know you agree with me. Man, say that.
He's hard to please, man. So
I was going to say, Zuko said amen.
But there's something striking about that scene, I think, that speaks to the entire episode, from Topsy Bopsy to Emmett Till to, from the evilness of the whiteness with the, I forget the police officer's name.
Lancaster.
To just that whole kind of, like that confrontation of evil and good, but also that intersection of evil and good.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that whole supernatural lovemaking scene just really, helps to set us up for what's to come in the rest of that episode. So I agree with you, but for me, it was that moment of Ruby Hillary looking into the camera.
No,
that just got me in that scene.
it was amazing. And then the only other that I can remember supernatural lovemaking scene we saw was in Korea. And we saw how that turned out, right? That wasn't the same type of supernatural love per se. So I think you're right. I think this scene kind of culminated for me just a lot of tensions in the show and put them in to live life in this incredibly intense way. And I dug it.
Right. Even outside of the episode, the entire series, I think, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I could say that about the entire series, yeah.
I mean, I liked. I thought that scene was also interesting, just in the way in which they handle bodies, right? I mean, coming back to like having a lovemaking scene and allowing Ruby to ultimately be central, and I was actually reading it a little bit differently. Well, not differently, but it's like the phrase that went through my head was no matter what, blackness wins out, right? Mm. That she takes on this form that we're told is supposed to be ideal, right? And ultimately, when it comes time to experience the ultimate pleasure, to complete the act, blackness comes out. And it's not just about blackness, it's also about this contrast it's about this contrast in idealized skin tones, and also idealized body types and shapes as well, right?
Yep.
In the end, what comes out is arguably what the viewer really wants to see, which is Ruby. And I like the way, and I like how we work. I like the fact that we're able to work into that, right? It's interesting because I'm still thinking, I'm still like percolating in my head, but I feel like with like there's something going on with Ruby where we go through all of these interesting scenes where like her physicality is at first sort of hidden and then embraced. Mm-hmm. And not just by the characters, but also I feel like that's what's happening with the audience, and I love that. And as for, Byron, what you said about the police officer, I want to return to him because I have some, I picked up some other things on here that I thought were kind of interesting, but I don't want to move along from the subject matter at hand.
No, I get it. I want to just say a little bit more about that scene. Ruby's the one that knows how to play with fire. Ruby's the one that knows who she is so well. Mm-hmm. That she can play in this supernatural realm and push the boundaries in ways that Letty doesn't understand about herself yet. I don't think she realizes she's a conjurer. There are other characters, but I think Ruby's the one who's most comfortable with her supernatural powers. And we'll see Hippolyta come in later, I suspect. But go ahead.
I agree. I think that's really interesting. And that's what I took away from this episode, that Ruby's power doesn't come from her ability to necessarily understand the magic. It really comes from her power of her own self-belief.
Oh, well said.
She's so incredibly self-assured. I mean, everything we know about spells and magic incantation, if you don't believe in the magic, it doesn't work.
Right.
Really. And the fact that we see Ruby break out of this costume, if you will, while she's making love at the point of climax. Ruby's power definitely, like you said, is rooted in self-belief. She's playing.
Yes.
She is. She's playing in a way that black characters don't often get to play. in these stories. When she says, I don't want to be white, I'm just sick of forgiving every space that I enter because it's not for me. You know, Ruby's playing, and I said it, I thought that Ruby was going to emerge as that, you know, linchpin between Tick and Letty and Christina. Now, are we talking about Christina yet, or?
Well, there's a really good point there, because Christina's power is all borrowed, right?
And
Christina does not have that inner strength of Ruby, and that's why I think. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say, I think that to what Cianna was saying, like, I kept wondering, like, why does Christina never break when she's William? Like, she never accidentally shifts, and I thought, like, oh, like, it's like she's more whatever, but I think it's because Ruby's power is just so much more, she's so much in tune with who she is as a person, it can't help but come through. Whereas Christina's like, no, I'm good being whatever I need to be in the moment, and I'm just gonna like soak that up and just, you know, like I felt like there's a little bit of insight with Christina in that too, and that, yeah, Ruby is who she is and she believes in who she is and she's very strong in that. I don't think Christina has that same, she has a goal, but I don't think she has the same, I don't know what word I'm trying to use, identity development or self-confidence or like.
Well, Stanford called it conditional power at the very first episode, right? That her power is conditional. And I would argue that Ruby's power is what we call endogenous. It's part of what she is. Whereas Christina, it's not part of what she is. It's exogenous. It comes from outside of her. And if you're looking for power, you want the endogenous type, right? I'll stop there.
You're alluding to this natural ability that Tick has that he's not even aware of. Christina, who is going to these lengths, her gifts are borrowed, if not stolen. And the lengths that she's going to hold on to that power, I think is really, really interesting.
I couldn't help but wonder at the end of this episode if how Ruby is going to fare at the end of all this, because I do believe that Ruby, of all the characters, like you all said, is in touch with her powers. And I want to ask a question also. Isn't Ruby's family the one that's in the book of names? Didn't that come out in an episode, like last episode or something, where she told that,
you're right.
Yeah, Christina says it has to do with your family.
Yeah. So I think there's something really that's going to be really powerful about Ruby when it comes down to if there's a last confrontation or not. I'm not sure if that's what this is all coming to. I'm assuming it is. But something, I think Ruby's powers are going to emerge somehow. Because I think she is, you know, embracing those more than anyone else. I think even from her lines this week, I think she embraces the, you know, her what it means to be a Black woman, a Black person in that time. And I think she embraces that more than any of the main characters in this show to me. Because her line, you know, she does my favorite line this week.
Well, bring it out now.
Well, I was hoping that I could do that. So, for me, but Ruby, when Ruby says, and it's you know when she starts off when she's talking to Christina in the living room or whatever, and she talks to her and she says, and I called that because I think, you know, all this leads to this moment where Christina, and I'm assuming that she's trying to, I call it a moment of empathy, but I call it her Karen moment also in the house, where Ruby says to her, a 14-year-old boy was beaten and shot to death and tied with barbed wire by the neck to a cotton gin fan and cast into the Tallahatchie River. But do you care at all? I don't want you to say anything. I want you to feel what I feel right now. Heartbroken, scared, furious, tired, so fucking tired of feeling this way over and over and over. And I want you to feel alone and shameful that I'm here feeling this and you'll never understand. I want you to feel guilty. And this is the line really. I want you to feel guilty for feeling safe next to you in your privilege. And I think that line just, for me, it just, I had to keep rewinding it. I couldn't even get through that first episode without rewinding. The first time I watched it without rewinding that line and then today when I watched it after old dude, made bond on that $1 million, it really had me, George Floyd's killer got out with that $1 million bond. It made me really just think about that line. I had to play that over and over and over again today to, because I thought that line was just so powerful and speaks so much to where you would have been in that moment and where we are now, I think, right? And Scott, this is how I mean, I think it gets to this moment of empathy, right? This empathic moment where she's asking that question, but then when, Christina does the act that she does, is this what it takes to, because this is something I'm constantly questioning about empathy. What does empathy even look like in 2020? Which we could say in ask that same question, what does it look like? And in that moment that this episode's taking place, right? And, how do you get that for a non-Black person? How do you get that feeling? Can you ever understand that feeling?
No, absolutely.
What I thought was interesting, because I also had that conversation down as my quote too. I loved how they did Christina's response, and it so illustrates many of the dynamics of the racial divide. And I'll just do it. She says, "I don't care about Emmett Till. I don't care about Roy Bryant or J.W. Milam, who'll never see justice, and I don't think you really do either, right?" It's like being, and she said, when she took the potions, she describes being unmade. It's what you said about the transformation, but that's not what I saw when I was fucking you. I saw someone being reborn. You took that potion because you wanted to hide from the fact that even on today of all days, you were a woman. And it was just like that she built up to that ultimately when Ruby is asserting her intersectionality, the only thing instead of embracing that difference or trying to understand, the only thing Christina can do is say, "Oh no, you're a woman. We'll just ignore that part of you." And she did it so blatantly, and I was like,
yes.
This is essentially the conversation that we're seeing today between Black people and many white people in the face of these traumatic events, right? Yeah. I think it's also telling the way the way Ruby both expresses that is actually expressing a desire for empathy, right? Wants her to feel, and then we come back later, and what does Christina do? Like, her whole response to all of this is, "Wow, since I have the power not to die, I'm going to pay some people to kill me the way Emmett Till got killed, knowing I'm not going to die," and not realizing that completely defeats the whole point. Yeah. That that most of the terror of the situation leaves when you're not confronting the end of all things, and that being the last of what you are. But she still feels like that masquerade. I say it's more of a masquerade as Emmett Till, as opposed to, although she would argue that it's feeling the ultimate empathy, that masquerade is exactly the problem. That part of the understanding between people is acknowledging what can't be understood. Yes. And understanding where you can have true empathy and where you are limited to only having sympathy, and allowing that to be there, right? So like that masquerade is in some ways is such a I want to say such a colonial move, right? It's kind of like, I'm going to take over what it is to be lynched. And on top of it, I have this power to come back. So I can tell people what it's like to be lynched. And the point of the lynching is not that people ever get to tell what happened, right? And so that whole thing coming full circle, it's still very much with me. And I don't know. I guess I should stop because I'm taking up too many options. Sorry.
You're right. It's like, the putting a pink pussy hat on a Harriet Tubman statue. That's pretty much exactly what it's like. You know what I mean? Like, no.
No, I gotta say that scene was one of the most intense, beautiful, poetic illustrations of privilege I've ever seen, right? Because it's the kind of thing we talked about episodes ago where you're at a professional meeting and everybody's suddenly getting woke and then that means that they get it. And no, thou doth protest too much, right? You don't get it. And those words weren't even used. It was just the act of pretending that your life's at stake when it's not.
Right.
And I now that you've moved me through that scene that way, I had those thoughts, but that puts it pretty close up to the Ruby scene for me in terms of getting a poetic message across powerfully with minimal dialogue, right? It's in the action, it's in the being, yeah.
And it also tapped into, and the other thing it made me think of, quite frankly, were the recent events where we had white women masquerading as black women in the academy. It also made me think of that, right? It's like it appears there's this appearance of risk, there's this appearance of horror, but it's not. It doesn't quite work again because you're not gonna die. You're gonna go under the water and you're just gonna pop right back up, and everything's gonna be okay for you.
Yeah.
But what I do think, to Stanford's point, that sometimes that is a manifestation of empathy, not in the traditional sense, but I think to me, that is a true manifestation of empathy, is for a white person to say to a black person, there's no way I understand your experience. There's no way I can understand how you feel in a genuine and authentic way. Because I think, like, to your point, where we run into issues is when people get woke, or people think that they get it and they think that that's the end. Like, I've reached the point, I get it, I don't have to do anything else. And I think that, honestly, because I think that in doing like a lot of diversity trainings and stuff, oftentimes white people are like, well, what can I do? And I think sometimes the what can you do is recognizing you need to have a seat, number one, but also recognizing that this is not something that you can colonialize. This is not something that you can understand. You have to be okay sitting in the tension of unknowing. And I think that when that's true allyship to me for white people, is to know that when to utilize your privilege, when it's appropriate, and when you need to sit down because you have no idea and there's no way that you can understand. And so I think that empathy sometimes looks like that. And that's not the traditional thing that we think of with regard to empathy. But I think in this sense, in my opinion, that would be like, and what Christina did was just a hot mess. You know how I feel about her. But I think that, if she would have behaved differently, she could have been empathic, but of course she wasn't.
Y'all so nice with it. I was just calling it a moment of Karen empathy. My sister-in-law hates when I say that because her name was Karen, but I just thought, I was like, this is, and I know some people don't like them, just like, this is a Karen empathy moment.
Vanessa, you're so on target. There's this immediate psychological response of what can I do? And the fact that those words come out create a border in and of themselves, right? Because what it says unintentionally is, well, all I got to do is something different in my life and the problem's solved. And in fact, no, there's a whole culture that needs to be reorganized. So what you can do is learn about that, right? And then learn about the multi-scale things that we need to do collectively. So you're right, it's empathy, and it's a kind of a way of saying, here's what I'll give. I'll give you my emotions right now. And sort of implying, don't ask for more. I mean, it's just, you're presenting yourself that way. You're presenting that border. And those words are a border. And they're diagnostic, as you just said. So, no,
and they put the work on the other person. It's like, well, tell me what to do. Like, well, then you're not doing the work. Then you don't understand. Like, I can tell you what to do all day long, but are you doing it because I told you to, or because you actually want to make a meaningful impact and you want change? Like, I think that to Vanessa's point, like it's putting it back on the other person to do all of the work for you, and that's not. That's not empathy, right? Like,
well, it's shallow. It's shallow. It's shallow empathy in the sense that you don't know any better. It reveals that you really don't know any better. That your response is, "What can I do? I feel your pain. What can I do right now?" And I can understand how that would actually be a microaggression, right? Even though you feel like you're trying to be nice, what's happened is someone said something to you that's actually violated your self-concept. And so what you do is try to correct it. You try to make yourself feel better by pretending that saying you feel bad, but that's not the work that needs to be done, right? There's much bigger work that needs to be done. And
but how do you get to that true moment of empathy? Because for me, at the end of that scene, I couldn't tell if Christina was crying or laughing.
Me either. That was what I was
going to laughing because she was happy that her magic worked. I mean, the thing with Christina, her most authentic moment really was after when, Ruby asked her, if she was capable of feeling something. And that is what that colonial mindset is, right? It's what about me? So it went from a conversation about Ruby's blackness to Ruby's relationship with Christina, right? That's just sort of how these diversity and inclusion seminars go from creating safe spaces for Black people and people of color to dealing with, your bigoted coworker's relationship with Blackness and how we can help them work through it. It's incredibly self-centered and really, really ridiculous. But I mean, I don't think that you can get people in that colonial mindset to that empathetic moment.
What's also interesting about it is that even as we talk about that turn, right, when it's like, oh, well, tell me what to do, right? What's interesting is that is actually a violation of an embedded social norm. And the fact that the person who violates the norm that I'm about to talk about, doesn't have, gets away with it, is a point of power and privilege. And the norm I'm talking about is the apology, right? I mean, I don't know how much you guys have, I don't know why I even started looking, but I remember doing a lot of research on apologies. There's actually several scholars who talk about what are the 5 to 7 elements of an apology, right? And if you look at the elements of an apology, they really are all about the person who is wronged doing the work. The person who is wronged apologizes. The person who is wronged acknowledges the hurt that they have caused the person who they have wronged. That requires work. The person, after acknowledging that the wrong that they have done, they're supposed to make amends. Again, making amends requires work. Saying, what do you want me to do, is circumvent all of the intermediary steps that are involved in an apology. Yeah. And so I would posit that given that in Western civilization there is a standard notion of an apology, right? A standard notion that when a wrong happens, the people who are more aligned with the wrong have a greater responsibility. It's interesting that when it comes to race, it gets abrogated even in allyship, or allyship in air quotes, right? That to me is really fascinating, troubling, and quite frankly offensive. But
And I think what tell me what to do is also rooted, like we're talking about, in this idea of colonialism and white people being uncomfortable in the I don't know, and I don't have the power to gain the knowledge category. So it's like, tell me what to do, because I'm not used to having to rely on others to give me direction. I'm not used to being in this position. And I think that it's an attempt to cope with the tension that comes with, there's nothing you can do, just stop it. And there you can't understand this. It's the entire premise of why white people feel like they should be able to say the N-word. This is not for you. No, that word is not for you. Everything else in this world is for you. That word is not for you. And and I think that there's so much conversation around that because, again, white people are not used to be told no, you can't understand. There's nothing you could do but do your own work, get away from me. And I think that they're not, like just traditionally, that's not, it's uncomfortable and people don't like to sit in tension.
I got to tell you, go ahead, Cianna.
Also, I just want to, we're a little off topic, but
no, this is perfect.
The other thing is that, do the work, but justice is not on hold until you've completed that work.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And that's the thing. They need space and they also need time. And there's this sort of like...
No, man, you are so target.
We need to move forward. And that's why I think that it's so important to have Black faces and people of color in positions of power. Because I don't think that that's the only way that you can combat this deeply entrenched, institutional and structural racism in our society.
Mm-hmm.
Everything is on sort of the white person's watch, and they've sadly just, well, not sadly, but they've just run out of time.
Yeah.
And Derek Chauvin being released today, it's just baffling, and how little attention that was given in the news cycle because President Trump has the coronavirus. He doesn't have it. I'm just going to say that. He doesn't have it. Nobody has it. Stephen Miller has it. Katie, what's her name? The press secretary? Press secretary, Katie McHenry? Isn't she a cancer survivor? She's a breast cancer survivor who underwent chemotherapy or radiation therapy. You would think that she would be sequestered, or I have no idea. I don't know, but he doesn't.
Mess.
That's what's dominated the news cycle.
No. So I want to quickly just go back to this idea of what can I do, and ask myself psychologically, what's on the other side of that? And what's on the other side of that is a realization of culpability, right? So that is coming out to prevent an understanding of culpability, right? And that's the thing that has to happen, is for people to experience, majority culture, white people, to experience themselves as part of a system, regardless of their individual intentions, that has actually hindered, destroyed, traumatized the lives of many, many, many people. And that's I think cognitively, that's the step that needs to happen. And I think what can I do is a positive way to saying, I ain't going to oblivion. I'm not going to culpability. And when you start having the culpability conversation in professional settings, that's when the difference in defense mechanisms really gets loud. And but if you're and I've not really been a facilitator per se. That's done by others. I'm there as a chair. But that's when you can see that borders are really, really, really being pushed. But I would argue that's a necessary step to try to get to this notion of culpability and the real nature of systemic racism. I'll stop.
Well, speaking of culpability, I gotta start by prefacing this with, I love Jonathan Majors as an actor, and I think he's doing a good job. But damn, Tick. Where do we start? This was, I felt like in the absence of like us seeing Tick's beautiful behind,
Again.
again, right? we have
Right,
been
right.
we have borne witness to how much of a bore he is, and we've also had to, at least for me, had to kind of sit in the moment of realizing that in the absence of getting to see his other assets, there's really not much there for that character. I mean, when he walks in and Letty and Jiha are talking, and Letty walks out, and the way he speaks to Jiha, I was like,
I've stop bringing her around if we're just going to disrespect her every time.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't need Jihad.
She traveled all the way around the world to sit in your girlfriend's dining room for you to be like, you mean nothing. Like, what?
It's not even just that, but pro tip, right?
Who are you talking to? You
don't have a conversation, and a negative conversation, or you don't have a conversation at all with your former lover that has to do with the sex that you had in front of your current lover. I mean,
Yeah.
it just, you just started there and went downhill, and then you're gonna cuss her out. I mean, it just. I was like, what?
Can we tack that on? Can we say that's due to lack of experience?
I don't know, because he's missing something.
Is it his character? Is it his whole life experience?
I think to what Cianna was saying, like, do you not realize who you're talking to? The words, so you killed 100 men, just came out of your mouth, and then you're going to turn around and treat her that way? Who are you talking to?
Yeah.
You killed her best friend. You shot her best friend in the face.
Oh, I love that line where she said, you killed 100 men. What's your excuse?
Yeah, that's my nature. What's your excuse?
No.
Now you stole my favorite line, Scott.
Okay, I'm so sorry. Well, then take over. I'm sorry.
No. That's not the one I'm going to talk about. But yeah, it was one of my favorite ones where she's like, it's in my nature. Like, I've accepted who I am. I've come to terms with who I am. I tried to help you. What's your excuse? And I don't know. What is his excuse?
But we also saw a difference in class there. Did she throw in in his face that, oh, you shot my best friend in the face, which would have completely destroyed him in the eyes of all the people who he values, right? Like, that was also really interesting. The way he, like, put her down. And even in the face of that, Jiha was like, no. And then Letty looked across and is like, and he's like, well, I don't know why, he's saying, why are you here? And Letty's like, because she loves you. Right. I mean, that whole scene, I was like, I get that. Like, I was just thinking to myself, okay, maybe Tit getting sacrificed at the end of this isn't such a bad thing.
Let's throw another theory out there. Let's throw the theory out there that Tick's in love with the abstract world and doesn't know how to handle the non-abstract world. In other words, he's reading the science fiction novels. That's his kind of escape. And in this world of what we would call real human relations, I'm just using that term for now. It's not abstract. It's in his face. It's now, and it doesn't play out well for him. I'm just throwing that there out there because they're writing him this way for a reason.
I think it's also, and you all know that I didn't like Tit from the beginning. But I have to say, in the last 2 episodes, I think I'm getting more of an understanding of him, and I'm feeling for him a little bit now, because I think everything that he does and that he says, even his complete non-caring about Dee in this episode, I think it just all comes down to this deep embedded and horrific trauma that he's suffered all his life, it seems like to me. And I find myself this week feeling really sorry for him, and not because I didn't like the way he spoke to I don't like the way he speaks to anyone in the show. I think he's horrible to everyone in that show, but it's just I think the way, for me, it seems like the way they're writing him is that this is this dude, this guy, this black man who has seen and suffered so much, who can't understand his father, who can't understand the larger world, who's confused about why he was fighting in a war, who's confused about why these tentacles came out of this woman and threw him across the room. Just about the supernatural and his own real life,
Yeah.
where, and partly it's because, I think he's gorgeous. And when he sat down on that curb in this episode next to his father, was like, I need to be there comforting this man. But it's, I think he's just he's so traumatized that I don't think he can. I don't think he'll be able to heal from it. And I think this is why, if he is the sacrifice, which would make that so beautiful to me, because in my mind, it's going to release him from all this pain that he's dealt with. And I don't think he can be released from any other way. I don't know.
Go ahead, Vanessa.
I agree 10,000%. I'm obviously biased, but I do think that I heard your voice, Stanford, when I was watching the episode, because when he told Jiha to get the fuck out, I was like, okay, that was not necessary. Like, you did not have to talk to her like that. After she took off her shoes before she came, like, you did not have to talk to her like that. But one thing that I agree, Byron, I think that everything he does is so desperate. It's so, every action is so desperate. And to me, it's 100% a trauma response. Like, he is so desperate to hold on to, like, whatever he has, and he's so fearful of losing it. Now, none of that excuses any of his behavior, but I think this reminds me of, like, what we're taught in trauma-informed care. Like, instead of asking someone, why are you this way, we ask, what happened to you? And I think that, look at everything that's happened to him. And again, it doesn't make anything, this is not an affirmation of his behavior. I think what it is a different perspective in terms of why he is the way that he is, but everything is just so desperate that he does. And that's why, like, my favorite scene this week, one of my favorite scenes, was the final scene where he touched that scary thing and he was like, ooh, and I was like, yeah, he mastered the magic. Because I think it was like I feel like he finally got a win, I guess, in some way. Like, from his perspective, it's like, okay, all this crazy shit is happening. I found out this thing about my dad, and then I got all this Young and the Restless love triangle situation. There's a baby. It's like all of this going on. And I think that was something that he finally felt he got a handle on. You know what I'm saying? And again, it was not okay the way he talked to her. But I agree with Byron. I think it's absolutely a result of trauma. And that's why I think his character is written so beautifully, because he's so angry and desperate. And those are the type of kids we see with complex trauma in schools. You know, I'm sure you can speak to that, Leandra, but it's like, clinically, that's from a textbook, like the way he's acting. You know what I'm saying?
It really is. And now that you say that, I'm kind of like, I think I'm too wrapped up in, like, don't be mean to women who travel across the world. And I'm trying to shut that out. And he's not a kid. So, like, I only deal with kids, right? But I do think the way you just described that just changed the way that I kind of view him a little bit. And I think the reason my initial response is to be like, I don't care, is because he's supposed to be our hero. And we're not used to seeing our heroes act like this. Like, it's so often in popular culture and in narratives, we put the hero on such a high pedestal that they're never, like, even when they have a little bit of a breakdown or they do, they immediately turn around and rectify it within a 60-minute episode. And so I think that you're absolutely right. We're seeing an illustration of what trauma looks like, complex, intergenerational racial trauma. And we're not used to seeing a hero do that over and over, week after week after week. And so maybe that's why I am still upset with him, because he's supposed to be my guy who got off the bus and carried the suitcase and puts on his glasses and has got it all together. And I'm not used to that. Like, I have to admit, I'm having to sort of back up a little bit and reflect on, like, why I'm so resistant to the idea of my hero being human.
I think that for me, and this is something I try to practice in my life, like, many things about him can be true at the same time. Like, he should not have talked to that woman like that. He should not be beating his daddy's ass like that. Like, all of those things can be true, and he could be a traumatized human being. He can be someone, he shouldn't have shot that woman in the face. And you know what I'm saying? And so like I try to, for all the characters except Christina, I'm struggling there. But for all the characters, it's like I try to, I that's why I appreciate the complexity, because again, it's like all these things can be true. And so when we look at them like as a sort of like the sum of all the parts, it's kind of like, you know, except Christina, I don't know. But
I was very DBT of you, replacing your butt with an and. I like it.
No, I very much like your appeal to desperateness. You know, when I get a visual image of him, and I'm not talking about him and his body, I'm talking about when I'm thinking about the character, I get this tornado that just has no outlet to be itself where it is. And this then goes back and explains the bathroom scene, right? It wasn't really that intimate in the sense of feelings and such. It was a desperate act of sex. And I just want to quickly mention when he and Jihad had, I don't know if it was their last argument, but she told him there's no book that you can hide in now. There's no book that will save you. He just found that book, and it's the book of his son's book, right? In other words, I don't think any of that's an accident. I think because it's in that moment of abstract thinking about the future and the future of the family, within which Montrose and Atticus have their most coherent, what we would call, you know, a touching conversation, because they can both align themselves with a positive future. But it's very difficult for them to align themselves with the past and try to deal with that in the present. And so I think, I thought, oh, okay, that's what I started that when I said the whole science fiction, the abstract thing. But, you know, with you guys talking about particularly the idea of desperateness, it makes sense. And I got to ask you guys a question. Kay and Peele, Luther the Anger Translator.
Yes.
Is that not what that monster was at the end?
Wait, what was it? Say it again?
Yes.
Have you guys ever seen Kay and Peele comedy show?
Yeah.
So there was
I've
a sketch they would do called Luther the Anger Translator. And I think it was Peele would play President Obama, and he'd sit there.
Yes.
Oh, he's very Obama-esque. And then Luther would just go off in the funniest anger language. And that was his anger. That just reminds me, that last scene reminded me of, you know, I was like, okay, there's my anger manager guy.
Well, but the other one thing I thought was interesting, interesting as we talk about some of this is one of my favorite lines was in that moment between Tick and Montrose, where you know Tick is asking him about, well, you know, about his relationship with his mom, and he talks about the riots, and then he said, and then he asked, well, why did you guys get together? You know, and Montrose said, we both wanted family. That's what our love was built on. All right. Yeah, it wasn't romantic, but familial love is the strongest kind. And I thought that was really, I really liked that, in part because so much of how we're looking at Montrose, right, is through a very heteronormative lens, where it's like, well, what is he doing with that woman if he's gay and he's attracted to men? And it's like not really getting at this deeper understanding of like family, not just in terms of who you're related to, but who you choose, and about how important that is. And it makes me really curious about what's going to happen when we find out more about how they're conceiving the Book of Names, because to some degree, this version of Lovecraft Country, the book that's written by Atticus's son, is also a book of names.
Yep. And it goes back to the comment we made earlier about Ruby and family, right? And it goes back to the comment you made last week, Stanford, about you know, these indeterminate family relationships and how we have lives that get built around them regardless. And then it comes just straight out in the words between Montrose and Atticus, right? Familial love is the strongest kind of love. And I really think they're bringing all the threads together with shared narrative, right? It's our shared narrative that is our strength. Dare I say a phrase like shared nomo, but that's our strength. right? And we're going to use that in a supernatural way to deal with this supernatural whiteness that we're in. I just get the sense that that's where they're going with this, because the clues have been dropped, you know, here and there.
I also want to say I just shouted a little bit at that sort of meta scene where he was talking about the book his son wrote, and I was like, oh, that's everything from the real book. It made me so excited.
I was going to ask if what he said was, because you haven't read the book, so I was going to say, like, did he actually pick up the real? Like, it's, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Oh, wow.
I think this when white people were writing, there's this reference that he got the book in the future by a woman who was hooded or on horseback, and it was during this white people were rioting in the streets. That's a reference to
Tulsa. I get I got a Tulsa vibe from that. That's the origin story, and that's Atticus called it the future. I don't know. I just got the vibe that, and there was a hooded woman with a mechanical arm.
right.
Hippolyta's, I mean, I got a Hippolyta vibe out of that too, right? But I also got a Tulsa vibe, so I'm going to use Vanessa's and both can be true. Right? I have no idea, but that's the vibe I got. And when a show makes you, go ahead, man.
I mean, I don't know. I mean, I'm really curious to see how I'm really curious to see how they handle Tulsa, given this is an HBO show and the way Watchmen centered Tulsa, right? That these media organizations do have a little bit of memory. So I'm curious about that. But one thing that I thought was interesting that was actually brought up on Kenitra Brooks's Facebook, where she was talking about where like some people were going back about the Shugas, you know, the monsters, and about how they keep showing up whenever Tick's in trouble. And when I was watching the rewatching the show, it kind of dawned on me. Yeah, they show up when Tick's in trouble, but Tick's not the one who's summoning. I don't think that he's discovered any kind of magic. I think that, quite frankly, Christina knows that she needs to sacrifice old boy on the autumnal equinox, and she's just sending those things out to watch over him, because we saw her give birth to, you know, or not give birth, but help in the birth of one of them, right? We saw her tell them what to do early on. Yeah, so I don't think that that's going to change. I don't think that I think we're going to get through this and find out that Tick doesn't have a lot of his own magic. That what's happening is a lot of people are basically going around helping him out and making him feel more powerful than he is, because they either love him or they need something from him. And I mean, because that's one of the interesting themes that I'm seeing here. Like Jiha, right? She done killed 100 men. She don't need to be protected from no one. And you know, I mean, we don't even talk about how messed up Tick might be, given the fact that his first experience, you know, his first sexual experiences with somebody who has tentacles coming out of their orifices and, you know, darn near rips them apart. I don't understand how you like move on from that like nothing happened, right? But
yeah,
Letty agrees. Letty's like,
you know, but like look at what's happening throughout, right? In the very beginning, bad things don't happen to him because because the Brothwaites want him to be a part of that ceremony. He's able to convince them to bring people back to life. Why? Because of that. But it's not because he has power. It's that they need something from him, right? And that just seems to be the theme with his character. Whereas all the other characters around him are acquiring power, and you know what? They're experiencing this really radical concept called, you know, internal growth.
Well, let me just
look at Letty.
Yeah, let me throw an alternative theory out there. I'm surprised Letty didn't turn to him as he put his hand on the beast and calmed the beast. Letty didn't turn to him and say, "Jon Snow, you know nothing," because that was a Jon Snow moment when he put his hand on the dragon, right? And what you got, oh my God. What I got out of that is, okay, he is part of this supernatural world. And he could be the way you're describing it, could also be the way that he just doesn't know. And because of this tornado of trauma that he lives in, there's been no space for him to examine. And so odds are it's probably going to play out like you said, but the fact that he calmed the beast implied to me that there was agency in him, magical agency, that calmed Luther down in that moment, right? And went from there. So we'll see.
We don't know, but again, I think I'm going back to Stanford's point. I don't know if he really calmed the beast, or I think the beast just knows it can't harm. I think the beast knows it can't harm Tick.
I love the fact that.
Remember that last scene, both Letty and Tick are both saying. It sounds like they're both saying it worked.
Right.
Right. And I think Letty has the protection spell on her from Christina. Right. And I don't think Tick and Montrose did the spell right, because remember, Montrose is dyslexic. So he probably said the spell wrong anyway. Not to be, not to make fun of him or anything, but I mean, can we really? And remember, there was that music that played when he asked Montrose, "Are you keeping any other secrets from me?" So there's more to I think there's still more to Montrose than we know. And I don't think Tick got any powers in that spell in that moment when they thought they cast a spell. I don't think he got anything. I also think that Christina was able to call that. What's the thing called again?
Sugar? It's SHOOGOH, I believe. Is how it's spelled.
OT, yeah. So, yeah, I don't think he. I think that thing would have chopped his head off if it hadn't been for Christina. So I don't know, but just really one funny thing. I thought that was hilarious when the body was flying over the house. There was some comedy in this episode that just had me. The whole thing. A lot of people were talking about how this episode frightened them so much. And I don't know if it's just that I'm so used to it, but nothing really frightened it to me. I mean, I watched it one night at 1 o'clock in the morning because I just wanted to see Topsy and Bopsy again.
Yeah.
Because I thought that was just brilliant.
Choreography was great.
Yeah.
I also watched it because I love the whole thing. We haven't talked about Dee yet. And I love the whole thing about this someone wrote online of that they were saying, why has Dee got to be so angry? But I think once again, this was the trauma of Dee from what she went through, but also the empowerment of Dee in that moment when she had to empower herself finally to, to do battle with I'm just going to say Topsy, to do battle with the Topsy character. But I just thought it was, I loved her in this episode because of the way she, her anger, her grief, and the trauma that she had to deal with and how all that came to a head. I think in that moment when she's on the, a couple of times when she's on the bicycle and she screams into the camera and rides past him. Then also when she's beating the one and then Montrose, of course, comes in and messes it up. But
as he does.
Yeah. But also when she confronts, what's his name again? Lancaster.
And
back on him, right? I thought her character, but the thing about that, I think what got me so much about it was their inability to deal with Dee, the adults. Mm-hmm. They're complete, just what's the word I'm looking for? I can't think of the word I'm looking
negligence.
For. Their negligence with her, right? And their whole inability to even acknowledge her anger and her grief. I mean, briefly at the beginning, when she leaves, they're like, "Where's Dee? Where's Dee?" Right? And then they go look for her. And then Montrose screams at her in the bathroom, but that's just Montrose inability to control
that search party. It just sort of like
I won't even escort her into the house. I'm so upset right now. I'm going to go meet Christina. it's just she was just left on her own as a teenager, right? Which I
But she
think
wasn't. What I thought was interesting is, on one hand, she was left alone, but she wasn't, right? Because she had Topsy and Bopsy. And I think it wasn't that she was left alone by herself. She was left alone with her horror. And I think that's something that was interesting. The other thing I thought was really interesting in terms of symbolism was anybody know the significance of the hat that she put on? That was for the Chicago American Giants. It's a Negro League team. And what I think is interesting about this show is their references to baseball have always been in some way, the first time we see Jackie Robinson show up and beat back the monsters, right? I was like, for some reason when she put that on, I was like, okay, she's safe. She's good.
And remember, she's swinging away at Topsy also, right?
Yeah.
She's swinging away at them in that last scene. She's swinging away with that instrument that like she's swinging away with the bat.
And she was doing fine protecting herself. Then Montrose came in and grabbed her.
Yeah.
And and then that's when Topsy started scratching her arm.
Yeah.
And when we do crisis work in schools, and I will be using this during my trainings from now on. I always talk about how sometimes we as adults come in to try to rescue children and we mess it up more. Like sometimes you just need to give them the power and the strength to heal and get out of their way. Like let them, you know what I mean? Like that whole scene, everything about Dee in this episode, I absolutely loved. All my favorite quotes, all my favorite scenes, everything comes back to her.
So what I thought was interesting about Lancaster, the police officer, it's like a couple episodes ago, he took off his shirt and we saw he had dark skin underneath, right? He's casting spells. He's not able to he's also not able to enter the house, right? But when he was at the police station with the other police officer and Dee came in, what he was reading, I think is going to turn out to be significant. He was reading the Chicago Defender.
Oh.
Now,
Right.
and let's be honest, in that time, white people were not reading the Chicago Defender. I actually think we're going to find out that he's kind of some sort of, his whole thing, I think he's going to be more of a Frankenstein metaphor, but he's.
You don't think white cops read the Chicago Defender?
Pardon?
You don't think white cops read the Chicago Defender? Or other
unlikely.
Intelligence on the Black community in the 50s and 60s?
I don't know, because what's interesting is we're being set up to. There's something else going on with this guy, and I suspect that the person we see is not the person that he is.
Sorry to say, Vanessa, our dear friend Vanessa couldn't join us for this particular conversation, but I guarantee you she will be back for the next one. So, okay then. So, Leandra, what did you want to say about Dee?
So my favorite scene was when she walks away from the funeral. She's off by herself, and then the two girls walk out, and they're kind of giggling and everything, and she just gets so mad, and she starts pelting them with rocks, and she was like, there's nothing, I don't forget exactly how she phrased it, but like there's nothing to be laughing at, or there's nothing worth laughing at. And I just felt like that's such a tragic and beautiful way of showing how when we're grieving, we just can't eat, like other people who are not in that state with us, it's raw, right? Like it's just, you can't process it. And she's so mad, and she has every right to be mad, and she has every right to grieve. And then the look on her face when she's done and they run away, like I did something, like I had agency, I caused that to happen. I just felt everything about that was really well played. The actress did an amazing job. And I just felt like that was such a homage to grief and childhood trauma of why do other people get to be happy? Why do other people get to live? Why do people get to move on? Why do you get to do this? And I just thought it was a beautiful, well done, under the radar scene that just, I don't know, it just gripped me pretty hard.
Can I just quickly follow up on that scream?
Yeah.
Because the scream, every time she screamed, it was as a supernatural scream. It wasn't just a scream, and I strongly suspect they actually edited the audio, because it was, you know, in the X-Men there's a character called Banshee who has this incredibly intense scream, and when she's on her bike and she's screaming as she's headed toward Topsy, that's part of her superpower. I would not be surprised to see that scream come back and actually do damage to some people, just like the other character, the Shubath, or whatever it's called, that came out of the ground, does damage to people. I think that we were getting a taste of the way she can do some damage and protect herself.
And I love too, like, she's, especially when every time she's on that bike, I just get like I'm just like, yes, I don't know why. And then
it's the silver, it's from It, right? Exactly. What was it called?
Really,
the
Silver Lightning?
Or I don't know what it was called. The bike the kid wrote in the book, the book It. Yeah.
And that whole scene too, like that scene where she's throwing the rocks, and then to come back and have Noelle, the young lady who gave this speech, I think it was I can't remember exactly, 2018, playing that dialogue, playing in the background as she's like going through the alleyway and she's being followed, like the whole mashup of that, bringing this time period and then bringing in something from our own current national state, and that powerful speech, like something about that mashup was just, I watched it 2 or 3 times just because I just thought it was so well done and so well placed, and also shows that we have not come far at all. We are still in this. So yeah.
And all that works at a human level. All that works at a Lovecraftian poetic level in terms of mashing up different times. And it's not, for me, it's not at all, it's completely intentional that it's a scream. I really do think that that's going to play out huge. And then when all the women are trying to save Atticus at the end, what she's going to bring to the table is that scream. And I believe it's just going to pierce through everything. Letty's conjuring, everybody else's superpowers. That's, I don't know, that's kind of the way I think they're setting it up. And that would just be awesome.
And I had to correct myself. It was not Noelle, it was Naomi. The speech was, I knew I had that name wrong.
No.
I had to look it up real quick.
You know, I've been thinking, and this is kind of, you know, I'm reaching really out here for this, but, you know, I think one of the things I love so much about this episode with Dee, I've been doing some more research into the Atlanta missing and murdered children cases. I'm going to be writing about that also. And it made me think about, you talked about this whole idea of her getting some agency with her voice, right, through that scream. And I think about the kind of agency those kids didn't get. And I haven't read anything about this with the show. I'm just thinking about how that connected to me, was giving, you know, it gave this child some agency, right, to say, you know, I'm being victimized, but I'm going to stand up to this, right? And it makes me think about what those kids in Atlanta didn't get. And just kind of making some connections from me. And again, I don't know if they did this with any thought behind it, with that, but honestly, this kind of notion of, I mean, when you think about Emmett Till, right, and this kind of loss of agency for him, for his body, and being in the South, sorry, that's a horn blowing outside my window. You know, I'm thinking about the, you know, these kids in Atlanta who didn't have that ability to have that voice, right? You know, Dee is kind of giving that voice to children, you know, to this kind of trauma, this childhood trauma, and she's giving that some voice. So, and I haven't quite pieced it together yet, but you know, when I watched that episode, I kept thinking, I'm gonna use this in the piece that I write about, because that's going to be a part of, you know, the Atlanta Missing and Murdered is going to be a part of my book. And, you know, Dee could have easily come up missing, you know, in this episode. And I don't know what's going to happen with her, you know, as we move forward. But it just made me think about that, you know, how her screaming and then screaming at, you know, at Topsy and Bobsy as she was leaving the, you know, the alley to get out of there. And just having that agency finally through that trauma was really kind of moving for me too. But again, it also was that connection of this real world trauma of violence against children, and I'm thinking Black children in particular, in this connection to the supernatural, with her realizing her power to draw, to draw these children. And I guess, and I don't know if she was like trying to create a spell of what she was doing then, but just again, this connection of the supernatural to, there's something very real in this kind of violence and ability for Black children to just disappear without a voice.
No, I another thing about a scream is that it's something that we do that extends out in a 360-degree sphere. In other words, the sound, vision is pretty much along a 120-degree space, but sound just goes in all directions. And I can even imagine imagery in the final episode of her screaming, and it not just going forward, but completely going out in all directions and all in 360-degree sphere, not just a line. Stanford, you said something about Dee being alone, and what I wanted to comment on that, you mentioned she wasn't alone, that she had Topsy and Bopsy with her, and that connected to what I thought was, for me, one of the more compelling things about Dee's scenes, and that is when Dee felt herself to be most trapped. She tried to lock all the doors, and she's in George's garage, and she's got herself in this space. She starts drawing a comic book, or starts drawing a comic, and I thought, oh, this is so cool. This is her spell, right? This is how she's gonna write a spell. And that connects to your idea in the sense that Montrose came in to try to save her. And I don't know if he knocked the spell out of her hand or whatever, but it was when she lost touch with her spell that she started to suddenly get hurt, by Topsy. And I'm wondering, maybe this isn't a space that Montrose can help her in. Maybe Montrose is interfering with her spell. I don't know. But that damn piece of paper better come to life. It better become Hippolyta, right? and it just better become this cosmic moment of just goodness.
I think that's a great theory. I mean, again, and goes back to my main issue with this show, is just how nebulous this magic is. And just sort of the really sloppy application of it. I mean, has there been reference to Hippolyta or Cianna having any powers, magical powers, any connection to the supernatural, any strange happenings or unexplained events around them? I mean, I think your theory is great. And I think it whatever she was doing with that paper, it was helping her. But
it better come
very,
to
very,
life.
very confusing.
Well,
also,
one thing, go ahead, Stanford.
Also, part of it, I mean, and while we think of it more in terms of Hippolyta's episode, but it also brings to light, we're right back at Noma. We're right back at the power of the word of naming and giving shape, right? And what has been interesting about Dee's character is that we're starting to see more and more about how she's giving shape to the universe. And we see it at the very beginning with her doodles on the map, right? The doodles on the map are what's guiding the people even more so than the map itself, right? Because the doodles on the map is what gives different spaces a different type of emphasis, right? They never go on one of these trips without one of Dee's comics, right? Hippolyta, she takes on the image of the character that Dee creates. And even now, as we're moving away from the multiverse machine, right? And this is kind of interesting, like gender thing as well, is that Atticus comes away with the book that his son wrote, and he's already talking about how important that must be, right? Meanwhile, he's not like even thinking of the importance of Dee's work, because Dee's been writing Dee has been writing the book, writing the or creating the stories along the way in real time, right? And so I think that there's an interesting, to me, what's interesting to me about all this is it points to Dee being overlooked. Not just, and I don't think it's just about her being a child. I think it's also about her being a little girl, you know? And what's hinted at, and this episode is also all about her disposability. You know, I mean, when she's experiencing, it's weird. She's experiencing, even though she's not alone, she's experiencing terror alone. Yeah, so I think that all that stuff is that's what interests me about her character is are these little moments where it's like if you pair up her character, what she creates, and her journey throughout the show with everyone else's journey, what you see is where you're seeing a really a different type of marginalization even within it, because the children's space is also very marginalized within this show.
So I've been experiencing Ruby as the Regina King of this show, in terms of the role that Regina King played in The Watchmen, and the sort of lived life strength that I see Ruby bringing to the show. And I'm wondering if, in fact, all these comics that Dee has been putting in giving to George before he goes on these trips, I wouldn't be surprised if we find out those were spells, and that she actually knows her power in this cosmic sort of way and has been protecting people with these comic books that she's been writing, sending them on their trips into these spaces that she clearly knows are dangerous. That would just be such a cool, for me anyway, a cool cosmic kind of supernatural. I mean, one thing about Lovecraft, it is supernatural science fiction. That Lovecraft always talked about creatures from the outer reaches of the cosmos who came here and drove us mad. So it's fantasy horror coupled with sci-fi, and of course that's why they call it cosmic horror. But no, I think they've really created some space for some super groovy endings. I hope that's what they do. I would love the idea of comic books being spells. I would just totally be down with that.
I wonder. And again, these are some things I'm trying to work out. I mean, it just makes me think about this whole notion of conjuring also. You know, is it meant to be, I wonder if it's meant to be in the end. And I've been looking at a little bit about, you know, Lovecraft and stuff. But I just wonder if at the end, this is going to speak also to this power of blackness and of black conjuring. Also, right, because it's also dealing with this real life racism that is definitely is always having to be combated throughout the show, and it was striking when you talked about Dee always drawing, right, always doing these drawings, these comic book drawings. If that's the kind of also this kind of, you know, maybe it's more, you know, I keep talking about this notion of this super and this natural, the supernatural. If it's just that kind of powerful conjuring that we're seeing now through this young black girl, right? That this conjuring exists, and this is a way of surviving through, you know, a lot of the racist issues that everyone in that show is having to deal with, right? So I think this combination of this, you know, science fiction kind of magic stuff, but also I think this kind of regular notion of black conjuring. Take for instance, when I forget the woman's name who came and placed the blood at the door from the goat, right? So bringing in this, and we talked about this a few episodes back, we talked about this whole notion of, you know, of spell making, right? And this kind of other kind of religion that exists, right? Or supernatural powers that exist within Black communities. So, and I think these also representative of that as well in this episode, right? This kind of natural ability, and I hate for this to sound, you know, I don't want to sound quaint, but also this kind of natural ability to these powers of survival, you know, in the Black community. And maybe this is what Dee is also, you know, we're also seeing through Dee. Because again, I don't know how all this ends.
Well, hearing everything that we've all said here. Dee is the one who screams in public. And I don't know if that was a particularly quote unquote white space she was in when she screamed, but she didn't hesitate to scream and to be herself in that space. She went to the policeman's office and spoke to him very clearly about how she felt, right? And we haven't really seen that. And it's almost as if she truly is a Gen Zer experiencing all this history. And it's like, I'm going to scream my head off in this moment, and no one's not going to know what's going on. It doesn't surprise me that's written that way. And then her way of being in that space is now contrasted with the way Letty's in the space, Ruby's in the space, and you get all these different generational takes on what it means to be in this space. It really well done.
In that juxtaposition of when we see the white kids out playing jump rope, right, which is kind of on Elm Street also, but it's also a juxtaposition of Dee's ability to just have regular recreational time is stolen from her, right? Yes. And I think we see that also as a racial and a class kind of issue going on there also, right? So although that scene with them, playing, what are they playing, jump rope, right? It's kind of, a little bit more horrific, but at the same time, it's also this kind of statement on, her, and Robin D.G. Kelly talks about this, the inability of Black folk to have that space for recreation, right? That recreational space. And that's taken from her because she now has to, do something to stop something from happening to herself and, to kind of save some things.
Montrose had referred to experiencing the loss of a friend to racial violence as a rite of passage.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, yes, he did. He did.
That was actually my other big, it's not, I don't like the quote. I just felt like that was such a straightforward remark, and it has not changed. And I think when we're, so I think, Cianna, that's a great point too. That I think that ties in because this is not just what Dee goes through, it's what all of children who are Black and brown go through, right? And so it's bigger than just that moment.
That jump rope scene is actually a beautiful encapsulation of the show in terms of what is horror, because a certain group of people might be watching that scene, seeing those kids playing jump rope, and that's just fun in life. A certain other group of people might be watching that show and see how, okay, look at the psychology of this, with these, as you were saying, Byron, the psychological state, this passage of time gets to be about. It's just about having fun and frolicking. And that's in that very space juxtaposed against Dee's space. And so the jump rope and what it's denied, who's been denied that space, that's the horror, not the other stuff, but the fact that exists for some and not others. And it all just kind of takes place very slowly across that entire scene.
Well, I mean, we're seeing it today, right? With this plot to kidnap Governor Whitmer. I mean, everyone's just like, this is insane.
Yes.
White militia groups, domestic terrorism, white supremacist violence. This is, how do we stop it? The threat, the growing threat of white supremacist violence. Yeah. Honestly, this is something that communities of color have been living with for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Wow. I remember being on
lived under the threat of domestic terror and white supremacist domestic terrorism for generations. It is very much a part of our story.
The first panel at a Comic-Con I was ever on was Stanford. We started discussing the character Punisher.
Right.
And one of the panelists was arguing about some people see themselves as a Punisher because they get so sick and tired of how corrupt and et cetera.
Oh yeah, I remember that.
Yeah, I was there for that too. Yeah.
And Stanford came out and said, "Excuse me, Punisher is a Black person's nightmare." Right? So Stanford, if you want to explain that, because it's relevant to what we're talking about here, right?
Yeah. To me, to be, in fact, I even said it there. I said, to be able to revel in Punisher as a heroic figure is the ultimate in dysfunctional white privilege. And this ability to like look at a character and be like, well, he rails against the laws. He gets this vigilante justice, but vigilante justice, you see in vigilante justice, that's actually the way the racialized mob functions, right? It is an affront against somebody, and it's like, we're going to go get justice, and we're going to go get justice often ends with black men and black women being strung up from trees, right? And it's usually, and it's a justice that is, it is a justice that's totally out of proportion to the acts, if there is any proportionality to the acts to be had in the first place. I mean, Emmett Till, because he whistled at a white woman or whatever. I mean, the response it's not even in the same category as the offense, right? And that's even when the offense is there to be had. But this idea that the law is something, is something that we just kind of make of our own, that is mob violence. And it's often the law that protects black people. Like, in the absence of laws that say, well, we can't just up and kill people because we don't like them. Right. What is that? That's kind of what's happening. That's what's happening in the gym. That's what's happening in the Jim Crow South. That's what's happening in these sundown towns, right? We don't like these people, right? And so, so for me, I also am very, like, I remember reading. I actually read one of the first Punishers one of the first appearances of Punisher was a Marvel 2-in-1 with Nightcrawler and Spider-Man, and there's this old Jewish guy who witnesses the crime, and he sees the Punisher, and he immediately identifies that Punisher skull as being similar to the Nazi symbols.
There you
go.
Like,
that's where this character starts.
Yes.
And for this character to be seen as heroic, to me is actually is valorizing. Yeah. Not just vigilantism, but it does through the back end valorize all of the forms of vigilantism takes place.
Yeah, I don't think he was on that panel with us, but I was on a panel with Carl Potts, who actually edited Punisher for a long time, and he said the stuff that people used to send in, the fan mail praising Punisher, he would say, dude, that's not what we were trying to do with that character, right? We were trying to say something about vigilantism and the things that you're saying here, Stanford. So it's interesting how that image out there can almost be a Rorschach, right? For sort of figuring out how people feel about mob violence and such. The debate on national television right now, whether or not to call them vigilantes or terrorists. I mean, that's a whole Rorschach on the Punisher kind of character, and how people come down on that lets you know everything you need to know, right? Lets you know everything you need to know. That was a fun panel, by the way, Stanford. That was a good time.
Yeah, it was.
Yeah.
That was WizardCon, right? I think that might be the first time I met Stanford.
Yeah, it was.
Yep. And then we walked to the Comic-Con together, and I was like, I'm going to walk with Stanford and talk to him. Read some more about this.
I tell you, it's not skipping, it's on D, but one of my favorite lines is when I think Dee ran into the bathroom. I don't remember. She ran into a room and locked herself in. Yeah,
it was the bathroom.
Bedroom, and Montrose has this, it's actually a 3 or 4 paragraph, somewhat of a speech he gives her. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but I just love the final line. They come for you, you damn sure make them work for it. Right? I just love, in the end, you're not getting rid of me. And I'm going to do what it takes. And there's a lot he says between knocking on the door and that final line. But I personally enjoyed seeing Montrose say that. It just, in that one sentence, you recognize he knows what's at stake. He knows where all this can and has gone in the past. And, you know, he's trying to educate Dee, and he doesn't want to break up, you know, give her this nasty version of the world. But in the end, he's got to let her know, right? And I just love how that scene played out.
But it's also hard because we're literally watching her childhood be destroyed.
Absolutely.
In real time. And it's not just being destroyed by the events. It's being destroyed by the very thing that the adults who are on her side and supposed to be her allies and supposed to be taking care of her. It's being destroyed by them. It's that we live in a society where, like, the only response Montrose can have is to say, yeah, that's going to happen to you too, but just make sure you take as many of them out with you, right? It's not we're working towards a world where that's not going to happen. Right. At no point does anybody talk about working towards a world where that doesn't happen. That all of the narrative is about it. You just need to calm down and accept the fact that they're coming for you next. You just need to calm down and accept the fact that you're going to be that you're going to be the next to die, and it's going to be horrific. But you need to build up your fortitude so that those last moments of pain aren't so bad, you know. And
I think
that's
there's a lot going on, especially right now with Atticus and Letty. They're definitely combating that a little bit as far as trying to protect their family and the future of their family, for sure.
Oh, in terms of Atticus learning the spells,
I don't think that there's just this acceptance that you're going to die a horrific death and you just have to lay down and accept it. I mean, I'm not necessarily sure that's...
Well, you know, Byron has been talking about the supernatural elements of this story for a while, and in the end, I think the supernatural is this very poetic way of talking about power. Mm-hmm. And you know, for example, Byron got me watching Succession. And that show is all about power and how people organize their identities within spaces of power. And I think the supernatural is another way to talk about power. And so I do think Atticus and Letty are trying to get power. Ruby has
getting a job at Marshall Field.
Yes.
Moving to the Letty moving to the north side. I think the characters in this show are definitely fighting back and mounting a campaign to protect themselves, their families, and to carve out a better life for themselves.
Yeah.
You know, the loss of Emmett Till was definitely a blow.
Yeah.
I know I definitely wasn't expecting it. I did not think that's how the episode was going to start out. I think it definitely sets you back a little bit. But I think the trajectory of the narrative thus far has been very much about pushing forward and persevering. I mean, that's sort of what I got.
Well,
I agree with you, but it's a type of persevering that accepts that the world is not going to change. There's not like this, we're working to change the world so this doesn't happen.
Right.
And it's that part that bothers me. I completely agree with what you're saying, Cianna.
I do think that narrative comes out too, and it reminds me. One of my issues with school shootings, for example, is the narrative immediately was here. It wasn't, we're going to make this not happen again. We're going to protect you. It was, here's all the things to do to protect yourself when it does happen. So I do think that narrative is very, very present in the lives of children. I do hope that Cianna's right, that they're going through and they're going to kind of break the cycle using their supernatural abilities to sort of set up a different world where that is protecting them. But I do agree that there is a narrative like that, particularly with children and Black and brown children. That's the narrative that exists. And I petered out on that one. Sorry, guys. My coffee's not hitting.
Well, Stanford, when I just want to say when Montrose is giving that poison pill to Dee, he's hurting himself while he does it, because he's experiencing his role as destroying part of her childhood. The desperateness you can hear in his voice is all saying, baby, I never wanted to have to say this, but man, this is where we are. And I thought that's kind of dual reflection of how much it hurt him to have to say that to her, how much it hurt her to have to hear it. I just thought that was extremely well written and well acted. It just, you felt everybody's pain.
Well, I think that's why it was smart to start off with Emmett Till's funeral in that episode also, because that is when we saw a shift in the discourse of civil rights also, right? Where, and I think for me, Montrose kind of represents more of that old school guard, because he's still dealing with, his own history with Tulsa, right? And so remember, when Mamie Till made that decision, and so when she made the decision to have the casket open, that's also when we started to get a shift in the discourse of civil rights also. And I think it's possible that there's that movement now where we'll see, or where, like with Tick and with Letty, this kind of notion of shifting that narrative, right? That rhetorical kind of messaging, or the strategy of, because it was a rhetorical strategy in essence that Mamie Till did, to leave that coffin open, to say, this is what white hate does to Black bodies, and wanting the world to see that. I think there becomes a shift in that narrative that maybe Montrose and the older folk on there aren't, really ready for yet. Yep. But I think that kind of was important for me to see that at the beginning of the episode, because historically that is where, a rhetorical strategy created a change in a discourse on civil rights.
And then, not to get too much, go ahead, Stanford.
But I think it's also interesting seeing, also contrasting what's happening with Dee and the way she's responding. Like I thought that her going into the office where the policemen were and calling them out, right? That's something that that none of the other characters have done. Right. No character has of their own volition spoken to power in that way. Letty came close to it when she was imprisoned, right? Or when she was actually taken into custody, right? But she wasn't taken into custody. She walked into that space and was like, And I think that it's also interesting in terms of what's happening with those policemen, where you're seeing at least whiteness on the surface, right? Really coming for her, right? And even you almost expected him to kind of smite her in his office, and he lets her go. Why? Because he's like, well, we're gonna get her anyway. She's dead anyway, right? But in all of that, I think it's still a very powerful moment. Also, going back to our discussion about like the Punisher and vigilantes, right? Because the thing is, a lot of this vigilante justice happens because the police allow it, and to some degree participate in it, right? And so you're seeing all that coming together, and her just being like, okay, I'm not gonna sit here and just act like this is a natural thing.
Right. Not to be too analytic, too poetic, but there is this wonderful Lovecraftian multidimensional element of having all these different generations and their lived lives telling their story about Black trauma together. I mean, it's not really even science fiction-y, because families do, talk to each other, and people of different generations talk to each other. But this idea of everybody's living in their own lived bubble, and these bubbles overlap, is just consistent with this idea of different dimensions. They're the kind of different dimensions we're used to in our reality, because we do talk to people from different generations. But I like the way that sort of Montrose overlaps with her in terms of, what's the line? They come for you, damn sure make them work for it. And she makes them work for it, right? In her bubble, in her way. I'll stop. That point didn't go anywhere. But I do like the way they're letting all these different generations tell their story, and then look at how they interact with each other and how they influence each other, right? Because I guarantee you Dee's strength is going to end up inspiring others, right? There's going to be this mutual inspiration that goes on in episode 10, maybe even episode 9, where they all have their individual stories and their time, but they're going to come together collectively against something that's traumatized all of them over all of those different arcs.
He becomes the third voice. Because remember at the funeral, we hear the kind of Baptist minister, Muslim, right? Nation of Islam. Then we hear this new radical voice coming from Dee, her act, right? Talked about Stanford, her act that she goes to that office. She's bold enough to spit at that police officer who spit on her, right? And put saliva on her. So, this is this new coming of a new Black radical, or Black revolutionary, probably, right? Because we do see those two things set up at the beginning. Dee becomes that third voice.
Can I also just mention, I really do not like spit. So this whole episode was like another level of horror for me. Like, I stopped watching in the alleyway because I was so worried about what was about to happen. You do not need to put that in the recording. I just have to put it out there to people who are watching this, right? Like, I can't. Woof! All the spit.
Bad.
It was rough though. For me, it was also rough because I go back and I watch the episodes over and over again, and that was a scene I started having to fast forward through. I
really, like, I felt like I had to stand witness to that and watch through it, but it was a hard, like, it was a hard.
And it was graphic. I mean, they spent a lot of time making that look that way. It was just, true horror.
That venom from him.
No, well said.
Yeah.
Okay, does anyone have any closing comments on this episode?
Can I ask a question real quick?
Yeah.
That was Lancaster. What are the things called again? The Shaga. That was Lancaster on the ground, right? At the end of that.
Yeah.
Being taken out. Okay.
Yeah, and then he literally ripped. One thing that was interesting was they did a close up of the sugar ripping off his arm.
Like in that first episode, what was it? The first episode where that happened to the other police officer? Yeah.
Mm.
And he ripped off the arm that was holding onto the gun.
The gun, yeah.
Is he dead?
We don't know.
Don't know.
Well, given he's a Frankenstein character, I wouldn't be surprised to see him put back together, right?
Yeah.
I mean, that would fit that idea.
Also, remember, if they're bitten and they live, they turn into. Was it the first episode again? They turn into.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Man, you forget all these things. You're absolutely right.
We're her neighbors.
I know. Yeah, I was gonna say I'm like, what are those people thinking? Like, when they're in their house, they're just like, I'm honest, my worry was that they're all gonna be charged with the murder of those cops.
I'm very interested to see how they're gonna write themselves out of that.
Yeah.
Some of that undefined magic.
Yeah, there you go.
And that scene was beautiful though, with the bullets flying past Letty.
Letty was so strong that
she sat up and was just like, well, damn.
I can already hear the neighbors like being interviewed right now. Like, we didn't want them to leave because they were Black. It was because.
all I can hear is that like redneck rendition of like, and it had eyeballs everywhere, and it can't, just like.
Oh, I'm not even gonna do a Southern accent, y'all.
I wasn't gonna try to do it that way. It's too close to home.
Well, yeah, exactly. It's a spell of its own. Oh, be careful there. So we do have viewer mail here. Give me just a second to find it. So, Alan Jeffrey from Chicago writes in. He says, "Hi from Chicago. Favorite episodes: Redlining Haunted House, Toxic Co-Workers Body Horror, and Josephine Baker Afrofuturism. Least favorite: anything where a supposedly sympathetic character murders a marginalized person only to have the writers conveniently forget about it."
Mm-hmm.
Exactly what we're talking about. okay, because I almost brought up the Montrose two-spirit thing again because of this philosophy he's giving D. He's giving D this encouragement and how to be in this space and move forward. And yet, and we saw this earlier, and I'm wondering if what they're, in the end, how do I say it? The role of the two-spirit was to show us the depth of Montrose's trauma. In other words, it wasn't about the two-spirit. It was all about Montrose and the writers trying to show how he's so traumatized. There are just certain things he won't let exist. I'll just leave it at that. Response, no takers.
I just think I see what you're saying, but I just feel like it falls flat to me, and it falls flat because ultimately, as a person who can understand marginalization,
yeah,
I sympathize with the marginalized character. It's like no one wants to watch a story that hinges on them being sacrificed in that way.
Do you think they bring the two-spirit back? Do you think there's a reckoning for Montrose with the two-spirit?
Even if there is a reckoning, I don't think it erases that. It's like, it doesn't erase it, because in the end, it's like, imagine you're driving with your friends and they decide that there's too much weight in the car and they like kick you to the side of the road in the middle of nowhere. Well, are you what's the difference going to be whether you live or you die? You still got kicked out of the car and left in the middle of nowhere.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there could have been reasons, and I think that's sort of something I struggle with the show. There are too many things that are undefined, too many things hanging in the air. Montrose needed to give us a reason for killing that two-spirit, two-spirited being. And it could have been anything, like, we're not bringing a 400-year-old ghost back home. Like, it's just not. And that is a valid reason. Like, you know what I mean? I would have been behind that 100%. Like, but they just sort of leave it hanging in the air. Sort of exactly like they've left Tick's little massacre in Korea. Sort of brought that up, and we're not talking about that anymore.
I don't think that. I don't think
touched on that again.
Yep.
And it's sort of hanging in the air, and we're seeing the way he's reacting to Jiha being in his home with Letty, and it doesn't make any sense. It doesn't add up. There are just too many things hanging in the air with the show that do and so we have two instances of sympathetic characters now who have killed other marginalized people or persons or beings. And I agree with Alan very much. They just sort of glaze over it without really any explanation, and you can't do that.
And I part of my test is look at the character who's being sacrificed. So let's talk about the woman who was shot in the face. Can you come up with any rationale or argument that you could make that would convince that character that it was okay to be shot in the face?
He could have been pressured to do it. I mean, there are not.
No, if you were that person, if
there are reasons, not justifications.
Right.
Reasons. I mean, this is a narrative that we hear a lot from the battlefield, of young men who go off to war, and it turns out to be something they were not expecting. They are in over their heads. Massacres happen.
Yeah.
Again, it's not a justification, but just to see Tick, the stone-faced Tick, come out of nowhere, shoot this woman in the head, and then get ready for a date with her best friend the next night. It just doesn't add up.
Well, I hear you, and I understand the pressure, the point of pressure, but can anyone here honestly say that if someone shot him in the face that they would understand it because the person who shot them in the face was under pressure?
I said it was a reason, not a justification.
Right.
And that's, when you're not fleshing out your characters and it's not good storytelling. It's not a critique of the character. It's a critique of the way that the show is being written. Does that make sense?
Well, I mean, one thing they could do is completely destroy the supernatural natural barrier in the next two episodes. And then all of this is a cosmic realm. And there could be a moment where the two-spirit who comes from a traumatized group talks to Montrose about shared trauma. I'm not saying it's gonna happen, but then the whole thing becomes this narrative about trauma and its consequences. That doesn't justify anything, as Cianna's saying. It's not justifying it, but it's a narratively, if they're gonna close it up, either Montrose is gonna tell us straight up why, which I'm not sure is gonna happen. I think if it does happen, Two-Spirit will come back in the final episode in this moment of cosmic alignment where all the characters are talking or dealing with this world of trauma from different times, different places, and addressing it. That's how I think they would close it up if they tried to. In a
show where you have all of these, which sort of relies on the shocking imagery that is relative to the plot, to just do something shocking for the sake of being provocative, it doesn't work.
Let's hope that it's still an unresolved part that'll play out. I'm going to get to Alan's question. He says, so here's my question.
Oh.
No, basically, he was agreeing with us. So it seems like there are two aspects to Christina's character. The first is a satire of the clueless white ally who doesn't understand why her whole, we started a book club to read White Fragility, you should come along, pitch is failing miserably. The second is Mephistopheles tempting everyone into a bargain with the devil, which is not going to end well. Does anyone else think that this is an odd mix? Loving the show. Thanks for giving us so much insight, Alan Jeffrey. So what do you guys think about his question about Christina? Is it an odd mix?
It's an odd mix, but it's kind of true. I mean, so if you go back over a lot of our discussions about how Christina functions, as sort of a modern day critique of being white and female, right? In that position, that is what it is, right? I mean, I think Alan has literally pinned the tail on the donkey of how that character functions, why that character is problematic, and then when you start extrapolating her character onto today's culture, and you start to get this idea of like that's kind of what the notion of the Karen is, right? You're like, oh. I mean, I think that Christina is actually one of, as much as I don't like her character because I don't like what she does, but I think that she's actually one of the most interesting cultural critiques within this show.
Interesting. I agree with you completely. And from this conversation, we can take Christina's character that's supposedly in a body, and we can just spread it out across an entire culture. She is a single embodiment of systemic racism, where on one hand, you can organize a book club on white fragility and watch your kids play jump rope out on the sidewalk. And then, but the way that very existence is keeping other people in a state of horror and depression, that is the essence of, I don't know what the word, systemic, the psychology of it is, what I'm doing in my life is making a world for my kids where they can play jump rope. And what you never entertain is how the life that you're living and sustaining is actually simultaneously working to keep other people in marginalized spaces. So Karen is actually this living embodiment of, Karen, Christina. but Karen too, right?
That's the thing. Christina is Karen.
Yes, supernatural Karen. You're absolutely right. And there's a whole paper to write on that. And the fact that the writers put all of that systemic racism and the supposed what we think is kind of maybe illogical and contradictory in one character is exactly the contradictory nature of American culture, right? So I think it's a huge, now that we've talked about it this way, it's a massive writing achievement, particularly when she said, oh, I really don't care.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't care. You're never going to get that out of someone's mouth.
No.
But if you look at Christina as an embodiment of a system, system doesn't care.
Well, you may not get it out of their mouth, but you'll see it on their clothes. I don't care, do you? Right? I just couldn't stop thinking about myself.
Well, it's also like it's in the contradiction that the horror lies, right?
Yes, exactly.
Because there's this thing that actually pulls you closer to what will destroy you.
Yes, absolutely. I mean, we see Ruby playing around with that, right? I mean, and the thing about Ruby is she has the strength to play with fire. Atticus really doesn't. I don't think Letty knows herself well enough to deal with that the way Ruby does. And Dee is just like, oh, I'm not going to deal with it at all. I'm going to tell you exactly what this side of Karen is, and I'm going to tell you what this side of Karen is, and I'm not taking it. So I think, yeah, so like you, Stanford, I do not like Christina, but I actually really, really love what they're doing with her character. And my appreciation of that has actually grown over the episodes. And then talking to you guys about it, and then Alan's amazing question. So.
Well, the other thing that it brings up, and gosh, I hate to say this because it's going to sound like I'm defending Atticus on this, is just you look at the shows, and the show and how the show works is very dependent on the perspective that the story is told from, right? Like the shows that are told primarily from Ruby's perspective have just a very different feel than the ones that are told from Atticus and Letty's perspectives. And I'm finding that like I actually enjoy seeing the perspectives that are not Atticus and Letty. It's like I want them to be like B stories, not A stories, right? But what's interesting about that, what that also highlights is that if you go back to the story that took place in Korea, right? What's interesting is that show, that entire episode is being told from Jiha's perspective. So we haven't seen the shooting in the face from Atticus's perspective. And that sounds like, and that sounds like it's defending him. But the reason why I can't defend him is I ultimately look at a scene like that from the perspective of the person who was recipient of the most harm. And I'm like, so, okay, I mean, when we valorize sacrifice, it to me, it better be a willing sacrifice on the part of the person who is sacrificed, right? Like they need to walk into it. But if they're not walking into it with their eyes open, it's not sacrifice, it's something else.
Exactly.
But I think that what's interesting is that this show takes on a very different and a much more, shall I say, critical perspective when we see it from the perspective of Ruby, and also when we see it from the perspective of Christina. Because even when we see it from Christina's perspective, she still doesn't come off like as a very sympathetic character.
Right.
Which I don't need her to, but I mean, I'm just gonna say this: if season 2 is a Christina William Ruby spinoff where they travel through Chicago and fight crime, I will definitely tune in.
Yeah, I mean, so much good tension between them. I have to give them props for the tension in that scene. Just the emotional tension, the sexual tension, all of it was there. It was,
played out really beautifully. And one thing that when we make the comparison between Watchmen and Lovecraft Country, you can't forget that there were some pretty amazing performances in Watchmen.
Oh my God.
Gene Smart and Regina.
Oh my God.
I mean, it is kind of an apples and oranges. Not to say that this isn't a great cast on Lovecraft Country, because there are some stellar performances, but I think the actors in Watchmen I think they were working with a better script, and I think they were given a lot more room to breathe as artists, and it definitely came out on the tape.
Agreed.
So I've got some other
You know
people.
what?
Go ahead.
I'm
ahead,
gonna
man.
take an unpopular opinion, which is I loved Watchmen, right? I love what it did, but I don't think that Watchmen was as even from episode to episode as we talk about it, and has to do with the fact that they spiked the landing, right? I think that in spiking the landing, it allowed us to be a little more forgiving of some of the episodes in the middle. I actually thought were, did kind of like,
That isn't an unpopular opinion.
So
I don't think that every episode, I don't think all the episodes in that show were equal. I still think it was one of the most amazing things I've ever watched, right? But I think what's really interesting is what we think of Lovecraft Country when we get to the end.
I agree.
And how we look back at all the episodes, because the ending also influences how you look back. I think that we I think that Lovecraft Country, depending on how it ends, given some of the episodes we've seen, we could be looking back at this as being in a much more favorable light in relationship to Watchmen.
I have to say, for me, and why I love Watchmen, but I have to say, for me, and I talked about this before, I just love the space for the viewer to imagine in Lovecraft. And I think that's part of that magic of that show, is that it's allowing me to really not necessarily know what's going on all the time or know what's going to happen at the end. But it's just that, it's the ellipsis there that, for me, makes it so compelling to me. I love the fact that it makes me have to work to think so much about what is going on and looking for all these little clues, but also thinking about how it deals with violence and racism together, and how I have to kind of piece these things together with these characters, and knowing nothing about these characters and going into this not knowing anything about Lovecraft, right? And you all know a lot about horror. I just watch it and scream and pass out from it, right? My earliest experiences of, first time I saw Halloween, I was in Atlanta, Georgia, and my brother and my twin brother and my nephew had to carry me out the theater because I passed out when Michael Myers first came on the screen. So, that's why I enjoy it so much.
We're not laughing at you. We're laughing with you, man.
No, it's okay. No, it's fine. That's one of my when I started loving, slasher films and really got into horror films, is because of that experience. I'm like, damn, something that powerful make me pass out. This has to be good, right?
That's
But
good.
yeah, for me, for this show though, it's that horror that's there, that I don't, that I have to write into it somehow, that I have to kind of write my own kind of, what is this, into that just really draws me. Whereas with Watchmen, I thought it was just, I hate to use this term, but was more linear, so I was able to follow it easily, I think. But with this one, I like the fact that I can't follow it so much, right? That, well, are they going to bring this character back? How are they going to tie this together? That makes me keep thinking, writing my own story about it, right? And I think that's what, to go off the supernatural from that show to my own supernatural, that's what I'm loving so much about it. So if you don't know, I'm really into this whole supernatural thing. I just absolutely adore it. But because it's making me creative and thinking about, how's all this going to work together in the end. And in a way, I kind of want to see the show. Part of me wants to see it come back, and part of me wants to see it end, just to leave me thinking like, damn, what was that all about, right? Because for me, that's what I like writing about, is this kind of, piecing things together myself. So I don't know, I love both shows, but I have to say, the way that Lovecraft deals with race and the violence of racism really just kind of has me, I think. It's grabbed me, and this is why I keep going back and watching it during the week. You all don't know how I'm really obsessed with it. I say I watch it 5 times, but I actually watch it more than 5 times. I just keep going back to these. I can't watch anything else except for Young and the Restless.
So I think that if the show does end well, right? In other words, if we respect how the finale plays out, I think you can see in Lovecraft, they're doing with multiple characters what they basically did with Regina King's one character, or her relationship with Gossett Jr., right? Those were much more non-supernatural. We believe those were people in a sci-fi world roles. And this one, as you said, opens up so much possibility space about where we think we really are, that you can spread that out across multiple people, and you don't have to have it be a person like we would think making the point.
I think Lovecraft Country can do really well as a series that has multiple seasons, because of its format. Ultimately, It's an anthology that has a strong through line, and that works. It's working
Right.
with American Horror Story.
Yep, exactly.
We've got so many examples of this working, and there's such a big world to dip into.
Yep.
I could see them doing another one a series that focuses on the civil rights movement, which we haven't talked about, right? I could see them doing a series that focuses on Middle Passage.
Yeah,
I think it would work as an anthology. I don't know. I need to see these come back and visit with these characters again next year.
Cool.
That would be cool. Yeah. Yeah. Like you said, did you say the Middle Passage
Yeah.
also? Yeah. Wow. I mean, that would be
As long as
painful.
Yeah, I don't want to watch a show about the Middle Passage. I'm a pass on that one. Thank you.
But you're right, because we have it where we do have this thing that could go throughout, right? Just like you said, American Horror Story with Fargo. Yeah, this thing that could just go throughout. Yeah.
So I'm going to go ahead and read a little bit of viewer feedback we got from Facebook. So earlier this week, I posted a picture with Topsy when Dee was in the car, and Topsy's got her hands up against the window, and I asked people to write in. And Christine Budney Myers wrote on, "This episode scared me more than anything else in decades." Min Montine Miller wrote in, "That photo is terrifying." And then Aaron E. Cooney wrote in, "My question is, when will I sleep again?" So I did just fantastic work on the episode. So that about wraps it up for tonight's episode. Thanks so much for tuning in. Brothers and sisters, please tell the audience where they can find you on social media, and we shall start with Cianna.
Hi, you can find me on Twitter at CC Greaves. That's at CICIGREAVES.
Excellent. Stanford?
Hi, you can find me at SW Carpenter on Facebook, and also as SW Carpenter on Twitter.
Excellent. Byron?
So you can find me on Facebook at Byron Craig, and you can find me on Twitter at Byron B. Craig.
All right, excellent. And Leandra?
Yep, you can find me on Twitter at Parris Leandra at ParrisLeandra.
And I'm Scott Jordan, and you can find me on Twitter at dark_loops. You can find all episodes of the Seers of Ardham at the Dark Loops Productions channel on YouTube. If you'd like to leave feedback about this podcast or anything else we've talked about, please leave it below on this YouTube channel or send a message to darkloopsproductions@gmail.com, and we'll be sure to read it at the end of our next podcast. So there it is. From all of us to all of you, big hugs, and remember, justice
cannot be put on hold.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
You don't need no reason to travel. Unknown horrors leaving in plain sight. Oh, God, stealing bread drives the world insane. Turn that evil darkness to healing.